Hey folks, welcome back. This is Joel, and in this video, we'll continue our discussion relating to Aruba CX data center technologies. In the previous video, we talked about static VXLAN. In this video, we'll delve into the BGP EVPN VXLAN using L2ANI and symmetric IRP. The topology which we got here is pretty straightforward, right? So we got couple of leaf switches, and then you also have a couple of spine switches. We have loopback zeros on the spines. We have loopback 0 and 1 on the leaves, right? So loopback zeros will be used for the BGP neighborship, and loopback 1 will be used for the VTEP purpose, right? The VXLAN source IP. Cool. What else? So in addition to that, we also have end hosts here, right? So we're gonna have this guy in VLAN 10, right? The yellow basically corresponds to VLAN 10, right? Or the L2 VNI, right? So these two hosts are in the same L2 VNI. By the way, remember you can actually use any other VLAN on the other switch, because VLANs are locally significant. When you do an overlay of this sort, you can technically go use VLAN 100 as well, right? Doesn't matter, but we're going to keep it really simple. So we're going to use VLAN 10 here, VLAN 11 here, and VLAN 12 here, right? The idea is to basically do L2 VNI so that I can show you that these two hosts are able to communicate with each other. That is, they're able to create a L2 overlay over a L3 network, right? The other idea is also to kind of show that this guy can also talk to 12, right? So we can do routing, right? And that's the use case of IRP. Alright, so also the agenda of this video is not to delve too much into the theory piece of VXLAN, because we already have a dedicated playlist for that on the channel. You can go back and look at all the technical details relating to it. But in this video, what I want to mainly concentrate on is the config snippets to get your BGP EVPN running, right, using Aruba CX. What is the minimal configuration you need to get it up and running? And we'll also do packet captures to kind of look at all the various route types, look at the traffic flows and things like that, right? So I think we can get started, right? So what I'm going to do is get rid of this. Like I said, the very first step here is going to be, this is going to be a game plan, right? We will start by configuring the underlay, right? The underlay basically is we'll be using OSPF here, so we'll use underlay to get all my connectivity up. Second thing is, let's work our way towards after this to the BGP part, right? Basically we have to enable the EVPN address family, so we'll work our way into that. This is the control plane, correct? This is the control plane of our overlay, so that's what we'll do. Next we will do L2 VNI, because that is needed for creating the L2 overlay, and the last part we'll work our way towards L3 VNI, which is needed for the routing piece of it, that is routing between the various VLANs in this case, or routing between the VNI segments, right? That's the game plan, right? So we'll kind of work our way towards it, and hope this session is going to be pretty useful, right? All right, so let's get my screen down here. So I have my console windows here, right, which is great. All right, so we've got the configuration, we got the console window up here, right? So what we'll do is we will start by configuring our switch, right? The spine switch to be we'll actually start with configuring the spine 1 and spine 2, and then we'll get into the leaves, right? So when you by the way, I'm using, let's just check that, right? So I think I'm using 10.14, right? The virtual simulator is 10.14. The first time when you log in, you will have to use the username as admin, right? You will have to use admin, and then there's no password on the box, so you just need to hit the enter and you will be dropped down to the CLI. Okay, so let's start by, okay, so what do you start with? Let's put in a host name down here, right? So I'm going to call this spine 1. Perfect. We also need to start with let's create a routing instance, right? So we're going to do routing OSPF 1. My bad. Okay, so we're gonna do routing OSPF 1. Let's go and put in a router ID, maybe 192.168.1.1. that's the loopback anyway. And then let's also create the area, right? Perfect. Now the next is we have to configure our interfaces. So we have like 111 and 112. Those are the two interfaces. So let's do that. So I'm going to get into interface, going to do a no shut. Remember to enable MTU of 9198 because you are doing encapsulation right in VXLAN, so you need a bigger MTU. Ideally you don't really need jumbo, but I mean anything more than your typical 1500, right? You need more than that because you have quite a bit of encapsulation over there. Next, what you also do is we have to enable routing, right, for this interface. That's fine. Let's also enable IP MTU, right? So that is a dedicated command for enabling IP MTU once you enable the routing. And then the next is let's put in the IP address, right? So I'm going to use like the /31 subnet here. So I'm going to do something like 192.168.3.0/31, right? So that's the /31 is what I'm going to be using, right? Because these are all point-to-point segments. We can do that, right? So then we'll enable the OSPF, right? We have created the OSPF area, and then it's going to be 0.0.0. We'll also, like I said, enable OSPF at as a point-to-point, so network point-to-point. Cool. Just to kind of look at it, show run interface 1/1/1. That's the configuration which has gone in. Cool. Same thing on the other interface 1/1/2, right? Do a no shut, MTU 9198, right? Let's also do routing IP MTU 9198, right? We also have IP address. On this particular segment we're going to use something like 192.168.3.4 maybe, right? Cool. Then we are going to do IP OSPF 1 and area 000. Cool. Then we have IP OSPF, we'll do network point to point. Cool, that looks good. So we've got the other interface up as well, 112. Let's quickly verify, right? So that's the interface with the right config, right? Now let's go and get our loopback, right? So loopback 0, I'm going to use 92.168.1.1/32, and we'll also enable OSPF on it, so you will have 0. Okay, so that's all the interface related configurations which we need. So let's quickly do this bare minimum for the other spine. So I'm going to do this while pausing the video, and I'll quickly show you the configurations which I've done. All right, so I've done the very same configuration on the spine 2 as well, right? Basically enabled OSPF, enabled 111 and 112 with these IP addresses, right? And also enabled OSPF on those interfaces, right? We also got one loopback as well, which is 1.2 on the spines. Cool. So now let's continue. Let's also, before we get into the BGP part, let's also do the same thing on the leaf 1 and leaf 2, right? So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Let me finish this. All right, so I've done the same configurations, basically the underlay configurations on the leaf 1 and leaf 2. As you see here, the leaves are basically connected on 113 and 114, right? So that is why you will basically see, let me just scroll this a little bit top. So that's your leaf 1, right? So on leaf 1, that's the configuration we have. So we are having, let's start with this one, right? So 113 and 114, right? Very same as what we did earlier. Just the IP addresses are different, right? So I'm using 3.1 here, 3.9, right? So you can actually use any other IP schema which you want. I'm just sticking to this because this is what I labbed earlier. Yeah, the typically configs are same. Only the difference is, in addition to loopback 0, I also have a loopback 1 here. Perfect. And what we also have gone and done is we have 2 end hosts over here, right? So those are connected on 111 and 112, right? So what I've gone and done as of now is so we've gone and just put I think right now I've put them in VLAN access 1. Let's actually fix that, right? So let's go and create the 2 VLANs which are basically needed on this guy. So I'm going to just say come out of this. So we need 2 VLANs, right? So we need VLAN 10, we also need VLAN 11, right? Which means now I can go to my interface 111 and we are going to drop this guy on which interface? We're going to say VLAN access 10. Similarly, the other guy, interface 112, we're gonna drop this guy on VLAN access level. All right, so now that should reflect basically show run, and here you go. So 111 is VLAN 10 and the other one is on this thing. Similarly, similar configuration here. Let's actually do that. So here the VLANs are going to be, let me get rid of this. So here it's going to be VLAN 10, and remember from the topology which we talked, we have the other VLAN which is VLAN 12 here. Right, so let's do that. So VLAN 12, we created the VLANs. Time to drop the interfaces. Sorry, interface 1 goes into VLAN access 10. Interface 2 goes into VLAN access 12. All right, so we've got all of that up. I think we are pretty straightforward. Okay, this was pretty straightforward, right, till this point. All right, now comes the big gun, which is the BGP part, right? So let's start with the, like I said, let's start with the spine here. Once we finish the BGP configuration on the spine, we'll be done with all the configurations on the spine, right? So I'm just going to come out of this, probably clean the screen a little bit, right? And let's start by creating a BGP instance, which is router BGP, and the AS number I'm going to use 65001. Let's use a router ID, right? 192.168.1.1. Let's create what we call as, just for configuration ease, right? So I'm going to create something called as a peer group, right? So I'm going to say all this is going to be the configuration towards all the leaves, right? So that I don't have to repeat these configs again and again, right? So the neighbor leaf peer group, what is the remote AS going to be? It's always going to be the same, correct? So it's going to be 65001 because we are doing IBGP. Let's also do neighbor leaf and probably put in a description, right? We'll call it as leaf router reflector clans, right? Just for our understanding. And then we're gonna go with neighbor leaf. We'll have to use the update source, right? Now this is very important. For the BGP neighborship, I'm going to be using loopback 0, right? So when you do show IP BGP neighbors, you will basically see the loopback 0 interface being used for that. But the VTEP interfaces, I want to keep, I want to use a different IP for it, right? The VTEP IP is very important because that shows up as the next hop in your routes. So I will show you that. For now, we have done a update source. So the BGP neighborship will be established on that. Using the loopback 0, and then you have neighbor 192.168 dot 1 dot, which is the leaf 1. I think this guy is 1.3 and the other one is 1.5, so I'm going to use 1.3, right? Peer group, and what's the name of the peer group? It's just leaf, so I'm using that. Similarly, the other leaf is going to be what? So this is where I'm enabling the neighborship, correct? So the other neighborship is 1.5. So yeah, that looks good. Now let's also enable the address family, which is of important for us, which is the L2 VPN EVPN. You don't really need IPv4 address family, right? I mean, ideally we would probably need it later when we enable route type 5, but for now, we just need the L2 VPN address family for what? For our goal, which is to just create a L2 overlay over the L3 network. So enable the address family, use the neighbor leaf command, right? Because why we need to remember, we created this template, we created this peer group called as leaf, right? Now we are going to extend it, and we are going to also make sure that we are making this spine one as the route reflector. So remember, whenever you configure route reflector, you need to enable route reflector configuration only on the route reflector. You don't have to do anything on the other side. So that's what we are doing right now. This peer will be restarted, that's fine. Then we'll get into the other parts, which is leaf again, but this time we'll send community, right? Extended community. The reason is because again, this is a very standard BGP configs. I don't know, sorry about that, I had a small power blip, but looks like I'm back now. So the last thing we did was, let's have a look at that, right? Show run BGP. Alright, so the last thing we did was neighbor leaf send community extended, right? So we basically enabled, we extended the peer group which we had created, and we basically made sure that all the community values, which is basically things like route target and all of that, right, will be sent as part of the L2 VPN EVPN address family, right? So continuing with our configurations on the BGP, so let's continue doing that. So within the address family, now it's time to, so we have all the configuration, so it's time to activate, right? So I'm going to activate 192.168.1.3, right? So that's going to be one of my leaf, and the other leaf is going to be 1.5, right? So there you go, that's done. You can exit the address family. Perfect. So that's going to be, let's just look at the running config once again. Show run BGP, right? So this is the complete BGP configuration on your spine, right? All you're doing is do your standard BGP config, make sure you're enabling the address family, and activate the neighborship towards the leaves. All right, so now let me go and do exactly similar configurations on the second leaf, right? So I'm gonna pause and come back once I'm done. All right, so we've got the BGP configurations here, right, which seems to be fine, right? The only difference is going to be the router ID, which is going to be different because the router ID has to be unique, right? We have the rest of the configurations very similar to what we had on the spine one. Okay, time to move on to the leaves, right? So on the leaves, remember, we have just scroll top, we have just done the interface config in the OSPF, so time to put in the BGP part over here as well. All right, so let's start with going into router BGP. It's going to be 65,001. Let's put in a router ID here as well. It's going to be 192.168.1.3 maybe, because that's the loopback 0 on this guy. Let's start creating a peer group here as well, right? Let's call this peer group as spine router reflector. The peer group is already up. Now time to create or basically add configs under the peer group. So it's going to be remote AS, which is going to be 65,001. Let's do neighbor spine RR, and let's probably add a description, right, to keep it clean. I'm going to say spine and RR peer group, right? Can be anything. I mean, I'm just keeping it very simple. All right, next let's go with neighbor. Let's also spine reflector, because we need to use the update source, right? Update source loopback 0 is important, right? So I think we have everything we need, right? So I think it's basically time to enable this particular neighbor for the 168.1.1. So that's the spine, right? So we are going to enable the peer group. Basically we are attaching the peer group to that neighbor, right? So let's do that. Let's do the same thing with 1.2 as well. So 1.1 and 1.2. Okay. Yeah, so there you go. So what you've done is, on this leaf we have just configured the peer group, but we have still not activated the neighbors, right? So that's what we are going to do next. So I'm going to go into address family, L2 VPN, EVPN. Perfect. Let's do neighbor spine, right, route reflector, send community, and we're gonna do an extended, because like I said earlier, when you're doing anything of sort of MPBGP of sort, right, you will be exchanging route targets and all of that as a community. So those are going to be non-standard communities, so that's why you need to add the send community extended. Cool. So the neighbor 192.168.1.1, right, we're going to activate it. The other spine is going to be 1.2. okay, show run BGP. Let's have a quick look at the config. So we've got the router ID, we've got the peer group configs, right? And then finally you have the activation for the address family. Okay, so I'm going to go and do the same thing on the other leaf as well now. All right, so continuing, we have configured the BGP configuration on the leaf 2 as well. Right, very similar configuration, only the difference is the router ID. The neighbors are here, which is spine 1 and spine 2. We have activated those two neighbors for the L2 VPN, EVPN. Perfect. So yes, so now time to go with the next piece of our configuration, right? So like I said, we have done the underlay, we have done the OSPF, we have also done the BGP with respect to enabling L2 VPN, EVPN, right? So now you need to, now we are basically heading towards getting the L2 VNI up, right? So we need to make sure that there is L2 extension between these two leaves, right? So that's what we need to do. So for that, you need to just enable L2 VNI, right? So that's what we are going to do next. Before actually getting there, we could probably run few of the show commands to make sure whatever we have done till now, right, is working. So start with, let's probably get on the leaf one, right? Let's do show IP interface brief first of all, because we have put, so you can see all the loopback IPs and all of that is good. We should also have show IP route table, because you have all the OSPF connectivity, right? So you can see here, if you want to explicitly see OSPF, you can look at that as well. So all the 1.1, 1.2, 1.5, you also, all the cross links, all of that is visible here in the OSPF. This is the underlay, right? Next, what do we check? Right, so probably let's start by looking at, let me just clear the screen a little bit. So we can do show BGP all. Let's look at all the neighbor families, all the address families. And if you look at neighbors over here, you can see, is there a summary? Let me just check. No. Okay, so you can see on the leaf one, I can see all the neighbors. So this is basically the spine leaf. This is the spine, right? Basically 192.168.1.1. You can see that's showing up in the neighbor table. And if I scroll down, you can see the IPv4 unicast address family is not being advertised. So as you see, the BGP is getting only enabled for or activated for the L2 VPN EVPN, right? That you can confirm again by scrolling down. You can see IPv4 is empty, V6 is empty, VPN v4 is down. Only thing where you have some data is the L2 VPN EVPN, right? So our configuration is perfect, right? Similarly, this is for the others, right? So you can see a bunch of things here. You can actually see a bunch of, this is again typical BGP stuff, right? It says the state is established and admin state is up, remote AS is visible. You also get like certain capabilities, what are being exchanged between the boxes is also visible here. Cool. I think I might also have a packet capture going on. So let me see if I can spot something interesting down there. One sec. Alright, so I was able to pull up the packet capture as well. So this is the packet capture between the leaf and the spine. So I put in a filter here. You can see the BGP is getting formed, right? So you have the initial TCP packets going from 1.3 to 1.1. As we all know, the port which is used for BGP is, TCP port 179. So that's getting used. So you can see the typical SYN, SYNAC, ACK, right? After that, you've got the, what are the different states of BGP, right? So you've got the open, right? You have the one sec, right? So you have clearly the open messages being sent out, right? So BGP open sent, and they're getting acknowledged as well. You have over here, so you have BGP open coming from both the sides. Then normally the BGP neighbors, they go into what they call as the connect state, right? So that is visible as well. And then finally you move on to the keep alives, right? So the keep alives start coming from both the sides, and finally the BGP peers, right, will be in the established state, and they are going to be exchanging updates now, right? So this is how it looks, right? So these are the path attributes and things like. Right now we are not really advertising any we're not advertising any subnet or any addressing, right? Because the rest of the network is down, but this is a typical BGP behavior, right? You can also validate maybe one more show command on the device would be just to check if the BGP is up. Pretty straightforward. We can just do a summary, right? Show BGP L2 VPN EVPN summary, right? So you can see towards both the spines, the status is in established state. Perfect. So I think we are good from the underlay perspective, and we are good from enabling the BGP on the control plane. The next step is getting into the whole creating the overlays, right? Creating the L2 VNI. So that's what we are going to target next. All right, I just realized that this video probably has already become quite long. So I will stop at this point and we will continue in a new video, right? Just to summarize, we got the physical topology app, right? Inside our event G, we got the underlay app, right? We use OSPF. We also then went and put in a very simple IBGP configuration between the leaves and the spine, right? Where spines are acting as a route reflector. Cool. We then also enabled the address family L2 VPN, EVPN. Okay. So that's it for this one. We'll come back in the next one. All right. Bye.